our followers of the Africa Integration Think Tank, of the Africa Integration News Agency. We thank you for joining us again for another session of interview where we talk about integration matters on the continent. We have brought you guests from the East African community. We have brought you guests from the COMESA Secretariat. We have brought you guests from the COMESA Competition Commission. But you've heard of something called the African Continental Free Trade Area. It is a new trade agreement that almost has been embraced by all the 54 member states of the continent. It is a very ambitious trade agreement. Many have heard about the Guided Trade Initiative. Many have heard about the PAPs, where we are going to have easy convertibility of currency from wherever you are. It is a very ambitious program that is coming to unlock intra-Africa trade on the continent. Today, we are glad to host a very prominent person who is at the center of all these negotiations and making sure they're implemented. Mr. Prudence Sebahizi is here with us in the studio, going to be talking about these things and more. He'll be talking about implementation of protocols on the continent. We know that there are protocols at EAC level, but there are also protocols at the AfCFTA level. Mr. Prudence Sebahizi, you're most welcome to the Africa Integration Think Tank and the Africa Integration News Agency.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
We thank you so much for having time with us. What is the FTA? What do you have that you can explain to somebody following the Africa Integration Think Tank and the Africa Integration News Agency on what the FCTA means and how is it coming to be a game changer to the African citizen?
Yeah, AfCFTA, when you talk about it as a framework of integration for Africa, it's a continental free trade area, which is established by a legal instrument, but that is just a legal framework when you talk about it in that way. But when you want to understand AfCFTA in practical terms, we are talking about a market. We are talking about bringing together 55 countries of Africa, create a market where goods and services and eventually persons can move freely with no restrictions. And this market, when you bring together those countries, you are talking about more than 1.3 billion people, which is the size of China, the size of India. We are talking about a combined GDP of $3.4 trillion, which is big enough to attract investment, even those investing within Africa or those investing from outside Africa. So for us, we see it as an opportunity to have this combined market for sustainability of businesses, but we also see it as an opportunity for easing the movement of persons and movement of goods and services, which will create more value. Today, when you look at the structure of Africa's economy, because our economies are so fragmented, they are so fragmented in a way no country in Africa can sustain its own population. We all depend on importation. So we only produce less than, some countries produce less than 10% of what they consume, which means that they have to import everything else from outside the continent. Secondly, the size of the market of some of our countries, some of them are even less than 1 million people. Those small countries that have less than 1 million people will make it difficult for them to convince investors to come and do business in those countries. But when you combine your population together, you are able to attract investment. You can produce for yourself, for your people, but you can also use that opportunity to enhance your capacities because we are borrowing from each other what some of us have that others don't have in terms of skills, but we are also making use of our own resources to add value to our production rather than exporting our raw materials and importing finished products.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sebahizi. There are new words or there are new terms that a lay African would want to understand, and how these terms coined and the processes and the protocols signed and the initiatives are going to benefit them. We have heard of the guided trade initiative. How has it come to improve doing business in Africa? And are there examples that this has succeeded on the continent?
There are three levels of establishing a market. The first level, which we can say has almost been concluded, is to go through negotiations and have a legal instrument. In the case of AfCFTA, we have agreement and we have protocols to the agreement. And one of the protocols, the most important protocol, is the protocol on trade in goods, which allows movement of goods in Africa, which provide for elimination of tariff and non-tariff barriers, and also trade facilitation, harmonization of customs, and so on and so forth, including harmonization of standards. So for you to make sure that the law works, then people have to test it. That's the second level. Implementation. You have the law in place. It took time for countries to agree on harmonized laws in those areas. Now, how do you test that the laws work? People have been trading. For sure, goods have been moving from one country to the other in the past, even before AfCFTA. But with AfCFTA, we want to make sure if there is a difference. If someone has been importing from Egypt to Uganda or to Rwanda, under normal circumstances, what we call MFN, or most favored nation, on normal terms. Now, what is the difference if you are importing from Egypt using the AfCFTA rules? The difference can only be felt when you do this kind of initiative we call guided trade initiative. We call it guided trade initiative because it is guided by AfCFTA Secretariat. So by guiding that trade, we get in touch with the country where products are being imported from, and the country of destination where products are being shipped. You make sure the rules that we apply. If you say, for example, we have liberalized this product, we have reduced tariff to by 20%, because normally tariff liberalization is supposed to be gradually done. So every year for some products, every year we'll have to reduce 20% until it reaches zero. So under guided trade initiative, you will have to make sure the taxes that you used to pay while clearing your products have reduced by 20%. And for us, we have to make sure it has been done. Secondly, there is what we call a certificate of origin. A product that will benefit from those preferences has to prove that it is produced from Africa. That's where the certificate of origin is important. It's like a passport. Identity of that product, that this product is African product. So under guided trade initiative, we make sure those certificates of origin are issued to accompany the products, so that those products are not treated like any other product. They are specially treated. So because the AfCFTA gives them that preference.
Thank you. Our viewers on the African Integration Think Tank and the African Integration News Agency, today we are glad to host. Today we are glad to host Mr. Prudence Sebahizi, Director of Programs at the African Free Continental Trade Area, and we asking him about what the AfCFTA is about, what it means to somebody doing business along the East African region, the southern part of Africa, and all the other regions, what it is bringing on board that is new, that the COMESA, that the ESC and other blocks haven't been doing. Mr. Sebahizi, there is the issue of currency convertibility. You find a Zambian coming to Rwanda or to Uganda and going to a forex bureau, then their money cannot be exchanged because they are telling them, look, we only exchange dollars, US dollars. What is it that you're doing at the AfCFTA that is going to make business different for people moving across different countries in Africa?
Yeah, when you talk about trade facilitation, there are different levels of trade facilitation. You can facilitate trade by improving physical infrastructure. You can facilitate trade by making it easier for the processes and procedures that apply to that trade. But you also have to facilitate transactions. And in this case, we are talking about financial transactions. For every trade transactions, you also have a financial transaction. You have to pay for the product, whether it is good or service, you have to pay. Now, we've realized that on top of the cost of the product, there is also a cost of transaction. You have your product that will cost $100, that's fine. But when you have to transact that product, you have to sell that product to someone else. The process of receiving $100 will add probably $50 more. Then the cost of the product becomes $150 when the product itself was $100. So to address that challenge of the high cost of transaction, within AfCFTA, there is initiative called PAPS, which is Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. It's an initiative that is undertaken by AfCFTA Secretariat in collaboration with Afreximbank, Africa Import and Export Bank. It's going to be a digital platform where if you have to transfer money, let's say from Rwanda to Ghana, instead of converting Rwandan francs into dollars, and then when my money reaches Ghana, the recipient has also to convert it from dollars to cedi. We can transact directly. I send my money in Rwandan francs, and the recipient will receive money in Ghana cedi. And the cost of that transaction becomes very low compared to if I had to transact in dollars twice. The speed is also going to be very fast compared to when you use international transfer system. You've heard of what they call SWIFT. SWIFT, like you want to send money to Nairobi from Kigali, but
You must have a SWIFT code.
yeah, but when you say SWIFT code, the money has to go through another bank in New York or in London before it comes back to Africa. So that cost of transaction and the time it takes, because we use systems that are not our own systems, is what adds the $50 I was talking about to a transaction of $100. So the PAPS is going to reduce that time, to reduce that cost. If I can send money, of course, it has to be integrated in the banking system. If I have to send money today, I can send it at 6 p.m. A recipient will see it reflected on the account maybe at 8 p.m., just within 2 hours. Yeah, because that transaction is going to be done instantly.
That's beautiful. Our followers on the African Integration Think Tank and the African Integration News Agency, we happy to bring you again Mr. Prudence Sebahizi. He's the Director for Programs at the AfCFTA Secretariat in Accra, Ghana. Our role at the integration, like we say, is to bridge the information gap between the people at the top and the bottom. We like saying the integration process must be people-centered. So our role is to bring the people at the top to tell us the policies they are passing and how they are going to help the people doing business down. Now, the issue of the SMEs, the small, medium enterprises, has been ranking high. Some have been complaining of access to finance, how they are going to be helped both at national, regional, and at continental level. So I would like to put it to Mr. Sebahizi. What programs are there to help? Because these are mostly the youth who are into this, and women doing business. What arrangements do you have for them at the AfCFTA level?
Yes, at the AfCFTA, we recognize the importance of small and medium enterprises and also the role that women and youth can play in this market. We know that more than 70% of businesses, job creators in Africa, are small and medium enterprises, and the owners are youth and women most likely. So there has been this recognition in the AfCFTA when heads of state decided to have a dedicated protocol on women and youth in trade. This protocol, which has just been adopted here, which is now going to be endorsed by heads of state in February next year, provides for addressing all challenges that women and youth they face in doing business, but also all the challenges that small and medium enterprises face. Issues related to access to finance, issues related to access to information, issues related to lack of capacity, and so many others that have limitations in their participation in the global market. So that policy framework which has been put in place is number one, which is the basis for facilitating their trade in AfCFTA. The second aspect that we have been working on is what we call platforms of engagement. Platform of engagement, we have now AfCFTA Youth Symposium, which is a platform of engagement for youth. We have AfCFTA Conference on Women in Trade, which is a platform for engagement of women in trade. We also have AfCFTA Business Forum, which we call Biashara Africa. Of course, we have Intra-African Trade Fair. Those platforms of engagement, we make sure we facilitate SMEs and women and youth to participate, to showcase what they do, to network and build a global network and with the big companies. Then number three, which is more important, when transactions are happening, like in the case of Guided Trade Initiative, we have initiated what we call AfCFTA trading companies. AfCFTA trading companies, these are aggregator companies where you can, if for you have, for example, experience in export and imports, you can form a network of 20 or more small and medium enterprises. You bring them together. If, say, for example, you want to export tea from East Africa to West Africa, then 20 small and medium enterprises producing tea can come together, use the same process, the same consignment, the same shipment, and you facilitate them at the destination. Maybe you will have a warehouse, the clearance process. You do it as a group. So you have an aggregation of 20 SMEs products that are being traded together as a network. So through the AfCFTA trading companies, which we are encouraging each country to establish, we are going to make sure there is full participation of SMEs and women and youth in trade. So those are the three key programs that we have, and they will continue to be part of the AfCFTA implementation process.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sebahizi, as we talk of the AfCFTA, maybe we didn't talk about the commitment of state parties. You call them state parties or member states? State parties, yes. We want to know, out of the 54 member states of Africa, how many are committed to this, how many have not committed to it yet? Because you're talking about all these good programs, but I don't think they will achieve much if some are slowly moving behind while others are moving?
There is a high level of commitment which we have seen in member states. Let's start with, for example, the signature. We have 55 countries in Africa. 54 of them have signed the agreement, with the exception of Eritrea. Then the second phase is to ratify. Ratification means confirming that you are going to implement. That means ratification by national parliament. 47 countries have now ratified. 47 out of 54 that have signed. Now coming to implementation, there are different levels when it comes to implementing commitments. Like when you look at countries that are reducing tariff, that have submitted their schedules of tariff reduction, we have 42. Then coming down to those who are participating in guided trade initiative, who are doing actual trade, who are facilitating their companies to trade, we have about 31. So it's gradual from the high level political commitment, and then coming to implementation of their commitments, we still have between 30 and 40. Of course, it's a journey because countries have to go through some national realignment of their policies.
We can see the participation is really not bad, but we know that implementation of protocols on the continent has been a problem. Especially, there's been a low political will on the part of some countries. There is also a lot of protectionism practiced by member states in Africa, and that violates protocols that are supposed to be promoting free movement of goods and services on the continent. We've seen that happen in East African community. The Common Market Protocol has suffered such setbacks. The COMESA, for instance. So one would wonder, Mr. Sebahizi, how is AfCFTA going to maneuver or bypass these problems where protocols are passed and supported, but when it comes to implementation, it is zero? How are you going to do it?
Policy is one thing and implementation is another thing. Some policies, you have to test them because you put in place a policy, and for it to be effective, it has to be implemented. And it is effective when it makes impact. We think AfCFTA, what is making it different from other trade agreements, first of all in the world, it's not just a free trade area where you move goods and services for commercial purposes. It's a developmental program where you have movement of goods accompanied by services, people, investments, and you also have alignment of policies like intellectual property rights, competition. And you add on top of those inclusiveness, where you bring on board SMEs, women and youth. So now it becomes more appealing. It's not a competition of big companies, it's just a developmental program where everyone will see the benefits. We think with that conception of it, with that philosophy behind it, we just have to create awareness to make sure that people see value in it, make it happen, because they are the ones who will make it happen anyway. I give you one example. Africa doesn't produce enough that we need. So we have all to look into the production capacities and see what is the level of the demand. We are talking about 18% of intra-African trade compared to what we trade with the rest of the world. If we are able to bridge that gap, that 72% that is lacking, 82% that is lacking, it's an opportunity for us to invest in Africa to produce what we need. That's number one. But number two, through the AfCFTA, countries coming together, they become even stronger to compete with the rest of the world. Today you see a lot of importation from China, from Europe, from America. There is a lot of importation because our producers in Africa have not put their efforts together. Through the AfCFTA, we are creating regional value chains. Regional value chains meaning wherever you produce in one of 55 countries in Africa, you can add value and combine your efforts with someone adding value in another country in Africa. Then you produce a product that will be called African product. And that product will be able to enjoy preferences in Africa, but it can also be competitive on the global market if you are able to reduce tremendously the cost of production.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sebahizi. And then maybe our last question is about private sector engagement. Because whatever we are saying in this interview, Mr. Sebahizi, is mainly about the private sector. I would like to know, in your conclusive remarks, how is the AfCFTA engaging the private sector to make sure this is achieved? The private sector is critical in whatever we are doing. How much attention are you giving to them to make sure this happens?
The message we are giving to the private sector is that AfCFTA belongs to them. AfCFTA doesn't belong to governments. The role of governments was to create a conducive environment, which they have done when they conclude the agreement, which they have done when they ratified the agreement. Now, its implementation lies in the hands of the private sector. The private sector can create value. They can get into production. Private sector can use the existing facilities to move goods from one part of Africa to the other, which has not happened before. You realize that like East Africa is only feeding Europe and Asia, not thinking of feeding Central Africa or feeding West Africa or Northern Africa, and vice versa. So it's the private sector to look at that disparity and make sure the transactions that are happening, they happen within the continent. It's the role of the private sector to ensure that everything that the governments have committed to are being respected. If a country has declared that they are going to liberalize the market, they are going to reduce tariff on a product, you can only know that it works if you move that product to that country. Sure. If a country has liberalized the sector in trade and services, you can only test that if you go and invest in that country. You go and establish a bank or any financial service. You go on tourism, for example. So there are so many ways that private sector can test that the rules that government have put in place are working. And we also have to make sure through the AfCFTA implementation, we create a lot of awareness within private sector. We build their capacity, and we also facilitate them. As a continental body, we facilitate them in individual member states where member states have not respected their commitments.
Our esteemed viewers of the Africa Integration Think Tank and the Africa Integration News Agency, we thank you so much. We had good time with Mr. Prudence Sebahizi, the Director for Programs at the African Free Continental Trade Area. It's a new trade agreement, very ambitious in nature, and it is hoped that this will be the magic bullet aimed at unlocking the big potential of intra-African trade. I want to thank you so much, Mr. Sebahizi, for finding time to be with us.
Thank you.
From our viewers, for us from here, it's good night. Have a great time ahead.